Okay, hey guys, Ridgeway here for our next world history lesson. So again, hope everything has been going well. Again, as always, reach out if you need assistance with anything as we're continuing to dive here into content. Note that this marks roughly about the halfway point of this unit. So again, keep utilizing the schedule on Brightspace to kind of see where we are and all that good stuff. But today, we get to talk about some nerd stuff, which is always fun for me. As I have to talk about my fellow people and what they were up to. So we are going to be diving in today to the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment and what they are and why they were meaningful. With that in mind, again, please use Pear Decks. That way I can track your guys' completion of the lesson as time goes on. You just simply click the pair and we go on, right? But we're after you complete this warm-up question, just what do you think has been the most significant scientific discovery of the last 100 years? Why do you think so? We are going to dive right into basically the content for today. So we're going to get right to it. So what were the main ideas of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment? And then we are going to try to, and we'll especially get to this next class when we meet in person, which is how were those ideas a departure from the world beforehand? So with that in mind, let's get right to the mini lesson, okay? So introducing the scientific revolution, that is kind of our goal here. I'm not going to talk for probably more than 10 to 15 minutes about this. But if you also notice this fun little picture that we have over here to the side, you may notice that this looks very odd compared to our maps of what we thought or what we think the universe is like now. All right, so the scientific revolution, let's talk about it. A couple of big thinking questions here, and really these are kind of like vice versa, because the scientific revolution, when that begins, depending on when you say it begins, with certain individuals, it is really going to have a very profound way that humanity understands the universe, and how science has this conversation with society, and vice versa. Because as you'll see here, and as you'll get to when you do some of the readings later, the scientific revolution really is a good pivoting point for understanding how people's understanding of the universe changes, but it also is a really good example of how sometimes prior existing beliefs really do have an influence on how science is conducted and vice versa. So the way that we understand how to do science today is in a large part, again, as Newton will say, we're kind of built upon we stand on the shoulders of the people who came before us. That is definitely true. But in some cases, those standing on the shoulders of those comes before us in a lot of ways, as you'll see here, kind of unfortunately skewed a lot of the science that people were doing up until this point. So again, I know that may sound a little bit confusing at first, and I probably didn't explain as well as I can, but how do new scientific ideas change the way that we perceive the world, and how do our established ideas influence the way that we perceive science? They kind of work vice versa. So let's just start with the super broad strokes. What is the scientific revolution? Okay, so the scientific revolution, very simply put, is just a name for advances in science. You could argue that it's much longer than the 1600s. It really goes all the way up to the present day. It's these advances, these just remarkable confluence and acceleration of advances and scientific discoveries that happen. In the 15 and 1600s, it's mostly led by European scholars, although there were certainly, at different points, even going further back, hundreds of years, advances made by scholars in the Arab and the Chinese world, and the larger Asiatic world that absolutely do discover or do warrant further discussion, but we just don't have time here. So we're going to kind of, again, try to focus on this 15, 16, 1700s kind of area. The bigger thing that I want you to understand is that the scientific revolution is happening at the same time as a couple of other really big moments in world history, and that is the rise of absolute monarchs and the Protestant Reformation. So I'll take just a brief 30 seconds to kind of cover those. So absolute monarchs, a monarch is a king or a queen. At this time, 15 and 1600s, and even into the 1700s to an extent, we really see that the power of a lot of kings and queens becomes more than had ever existed at any other time in world history. And so at the same exact moment that that is happening, all these discoveries in science are happening too. And that'll become relevant for something that we'll talk about later with the Enlightenment. The Protestant Reformation, if you don't remember that, or you haven't seen it in your textbook yet, the Protestant Reformation is when essentially the Catholic Church doesn't become the only monopolistic power of religion in Western Christianity. And so that is where we get the rise of Protestantism. If you've heard of like Martin Luther and his 95 Theses, and the start of Calvinism and all the different other kinds of Christianity besides Catholicism that we get, that's what that is. So this really does happen at again, just to kind of like illustrate the larger picture and context for you, is that this is happening right at the time that there are just these huge political and also religious changes that are happening. Like Europe is really on the move in the 15, 16, and 1700s. So with that in mind, let's get right to it. So at its base core element, the scientific revolution is this idea that there are, that there is kind of a really pivotal moment where this idea that, okay, there are these ideas that have existed in the past, in some cases going back to like the days of like Ptolemy and even further back, like Egyptian and Greek scholars. We can go back and we can look at those laws that, or those things that they said about humans, and we can test them. And that really is the two-part thing. Is like, one, the universe, the universe is a world that operates off of logic and laws, and we can discover those things. And then two, we can test them to see if those laws are actually true. And so the way that we test them is, if you've heard of it in science classes, the scientific method. This is really where we get, it's not immediate, but the scientific revolution is really this moment where the scientific method, through about a couple of 100 years process, is really where we get this idea where you can take something that you think is true, we have a process for testing it, and we can see if that really is the case. Okay. And again, that may sound like an insane idea that people were like, well, yeah, like we just took for granted what a lot of these scholars beforehand did, and they really, really did do that. But again, like this idea that like we can test something, we can take it, and we can analyze it to test if it's real. That is a remarkable departure from the past. Now, again, what I'd like you to put in here on Pear Deck is just something. What's a science experiment where you had to use the scientific method, probably high school or college, that had to follow? Again, you had to test something through the scientific method that actually proved something. So I had a lot of these in high school and college. But dissection would probably be like a really good, easy example for some of you. But if you actually had like an actual science experiment that you had to conduct, I remember one that was like in my biology class, and we tested like the effectiveness of different laundry detergents was something that I remember doing in high school. That was a rather interesting experiment. But again, we followed the scientific method, right? And that idea is something, again, that is brand new thanks to the scientific revolution. Okay, so why does this all matter? So let's talk about a couple of examples and how this all ties in. The classic go-to for a lot of people is going to be Isaac Newton. Okay, when you're looking at the scientific revolution. However, please understand that it is not just Newton who is the scientific revolution. There are multiple thinkers who are really involved in pushing the boundaries of scientific discovery forward. Galileo, Copernicus, the list goes on and on and on and on here. And there's also a very good introduction reading that I can pass you to later. But a really classic example would be like Isaac Newton and the law of gravity. Like, again, that is something that we can take about the world, we can sit there and we can test it, right? And we can see that it's true. So like back earlier, I mentioned that map that was on here about the how people thought that the universe was organized. And this is just, again, looking back at it, it's silly, right? Like how people thought that the universe was divided up. You can learn more about this in your readings, but the dominant interpretation of how people thought the solar system was aligned was this right here, where Earth, it's a Earth-centric view, right, of the solar system. So Earth is at the very center, and then the idea was, and again, you can read about the Ptolemy's view of this and why he thought so, is that there's these spheres then that surround the Earth, and each of the planets occupies one of those, and then beyond that sphere is the heavens, which are not observable by humans. So like if you go past Saturn, like that's where you get to this like angelic place where like matter doesn't actually have a shape or form. It is bizarre, like looking from a modern day perspective, like looking at it. However, in context, just remember, like, these are folks who, when they are, observing, like Ptolemy and others, there's no microscopes, right? There's no telescopes. There's no, like, all these things that we associate with modern science. So, in a lot of cases, they are trying to do the best they can with what they have. However, a lot of their theories that they have about the universe and what they thought was true just wasn't accurate. And so when Newton and others come along and do some very necessary myth busting until, well, Newton himself gets myth busted by a guy named Einstein, who you've probably never heard of. The importance of this is really key. And again, this leads to a whole bunch. Again, the scientific revolution is responsible for so much stuff, because once you have like a way of understanding the universe and then testing how it's supposed to operate, like, all of a sudden now we're talking about contributions that can be made in physics and chemistry and biology and medicine. Like, we can start to understand that germs exist, right? Like, I mean, again, it's not just, one small area that this is confined to. Now, importantly then, and this kind of gets to part 2 and a little bit of a preview of what you're going to be doing in the next activity, is that the scientific revolution just doesn't stop at the hard sciences, which are like, again, physics, chemistry, biology, medicine. It goes on, and it goes on to the social sciences as well. So what are social sciences? These are things that study people. And one of the ways that this manifests then is people starting to look at the science of humans and how we're supposed to operate. And what does that exactly mean? Yeah, we're talking about stuff like philosophy and anthropology and sociology and those kind of things. And really what that is emphasizing is the idea of logic and reason, rather than a reliance upon religious beliefs as to how people should be organized and operate and kind of go about their daily lives. And a lot of these thinkers, who you're going to meet here in just a few minutes, they're going to try to discover, well, do humans have laws that we're supposed to operate by? Do we have these principles or underlying, kind of like foundational key elements built into our societies as to how we're supposed to operate? And those are really, really key individuals who will help kind of take the scientific revolution and really adapt it to a new area. And we call this entire thing, by the way, the Enlightenment. Okay, so that is this bottom area of the social sciences. Again, the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment go hand in hand with one another. Okay, so that'll bring us to so why should we care about all this, right? So here's the big impacts, at least like 4 key ones that I can kind of point you to. One, the rate of scientific discoveries from this is simply unparalleled in all of human history up until this point, okay? So, like, the biggest thing that had probably happened before this time in terms of, like, meaningfulness to the human experience probably is, like, the discovery of farming and agriculture. The scientific revolution really takes that idea and it's like, okay, well, combine that with growing literacy, right, through things like the printing press. All of a sudden, then, we're now making new discoveries about, like, germs and fertilizers, and eventually, like, you just keep building on this and building, like, steam power, and, it just kind of, it's this kind of cascading snowball until you get to, like, lasers and ChatGPT, right? So the rate of scientific discoveries just accelerates dramatically. The other big thing here is that there was this idea that it existed in both for absolute monarchs and also by proxy the church, okay, which I'll, again, referring mostly here to the Catholic Church, is the idea that this idea of divine right really cannot be used any longer to justify kings and queens having that and or making decisions. So if you're like, what is divine right? Divine right was this idea that the king was king because God had made him, or the queen was queen because God had made her so. And you're like, how can you test that? And that's exactly what a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers, again, the Enlightenment being the more part of the scientific revolution that's concerned with humans, are like, prove it to me. Prove that you have divine right. Like, you can't put divine right in a petri dish, right, and test it. It just doesn't work. And so, again, it's going to really, because kings and queens had used this as leverage to justify their decisions as to why they were king and queen, again, they're not, on and on. It really does weaken that part of absolute monarchs. It also then will go on, again, the scientific revolution will really go on to cement this idea that in the world, in terms of how it operates today, the power of reason, logic, data, and science replaces that of the power of belief as to how the universe operates. Like, the sun doesn't, again, the sun comes up each morning not because the sun's actually moving, it's because the earth is rotating, right? Or it's not just because, like, Apollo rode his chariot across the night sky and that's why the sun came up. No, like, there's an actual scientific explanation that gives us this, and not just some religious one, right? That is, a remarkable transformation. And the second thing that it's going to emphasize is also secularism. So secularism is essentially the idea that broadly speaking, the actions of a state or a country don't need to be necessarily affiliated with that of a religion. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and call it non-religiousness here, but like, you're going to see that a lot of the people in the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment are going to become deists, which you'll see a term later. They believe that there is some entity out there, but it's not necessarily, like, again, the reason for why certain things happen in the universe. And it's also going to, one last thing here is it's also going to really highlight the contribution of specific individuals in pushing human advancement forward. Okay? So again, just some really broad, big picture strokes here on the scientific revolution. All right, so I've got a kind of a fun exit ticket for you here, which is I'd like you to make a haiku about the scientific revolution. So if you can't remember what a haiku is, because simply you haven't done it in 20-something years, it is a poem of 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables. And I'd like you to make that over here using Pear Deck. Okay? So, just on the scientific revolution. And it's a good, creative moment for you to express what you've learned and see what you can do. Excellent. So let's go ahead and try to make this now a little bit more relevant to you. So what I want you to do in the follow-up activity for this is to use one of the more recent scientific developments of the last few years to help make the content that you just learned about a little bit more personal to you and your circumstance. So what I've got here for you is a link to ChatGPT, and I want you to put this prompt into it. So it's right here, and you just retype it in. Explain the history of the scientific revolution in the 1800s for a college student with especially meaningful information for a college student who is a blank major. So you're just going to type your major in there, and you're going to get a nice customized reading of the history of the scientific revolution that is especially tailored for you in your particular circumstance. Now, what's awesome about this is you can replicate this on other readings too, okay? And what I want you to do once you've gotten the reading is just to read it and then to rate the helpfulness of it over here using that blue triangle. So you just kind of like set it on a scale. Was it super helpful, like thumbs up, or was it not helpful at all and didn't really give you much good, more meaningful information than you had gotten beforehand, okay? So that's what I'd like you to do in that activity. And then just to round it all off, so we go to our last slide here, okay? And this is where we're going to kind of bring in the Enlightenment half. But we're going to be doing something with it in our class in person, so just to get a little bit of context on that. So again, the Enlightenment is that related period of the scientific revolution that focuses on better understandings of people and societies and how they should work. So what we're going to do is we've got two sources here. Okay, you just click on them to access them. And we're going to use that information to create a graphic organizer in class. So for now, you can read them, you can take notes on them. Also, please notice on source number 1, if you click it, the first like 8 pages or so are on the scientific revolution specifically. So you can skip to page 8 if you'd like, but I've included those for extra context for you if you would like to use them for your own research. Okay, so there's source 1 and source 2, and then we will be putting that information to good use. So until I see you guys in class, hope you have a good rest of your day, night, evening, whenever, and I'll see you later. Bye.